my shepherd. I shall not want. That's one of the, I could have sung that song. That's one I remember Mom and Dad singing. I used to lay in the, see now things are too easy. I can go on the computer, get the lyrics, get the music. That wasn't the way it used to be. You put on a record. Wasn't even an easy way to back it up. You'd listen, write down the words, and then you spend a bunch of time trying to pick it out. And I remember sitting in the garage figuring out what the words to this song, it was a group called the Chuckwagon Gang. Those, you're probably not country enough, but there used to be on the Mole Singing Convention. There was a guy, a real rough voice. It was the Mole Singing Convention. And had the Chuckwagon Gang. There was a quartet, or was there more than that of them? I can't remember, but they sung "The Lord is My Shepherd." And I remember Mom and Dad singing it. I was thinking about that the other day. We might do it here sometimes, but folks, it's just, we are sheep. And like that little Bounding character, I wanted to borrow Miles' little trampoline, but I'd probably hurt myself. I'd be the first American in the United States that had to be rushed to the hospital because he got too energetic in his preaching. But just like that little feller that you just watched, we don't always have a lot of control over what happens to us, do we? We can plan. I'm a big Muppet. I'm telling you, I'm a big kid when it comes to cartoons. I don't know if you remember the eagle that they had on the Muppets, but he always was real serious. And he wanted all the mother Muppets to straighten up and act, dignified. And you've heard of the story of the ant and the grasshopper. Have you ever heard of, I think it was one of Aesop's fables originally. The whole point of the story was, the ant, he works all the time. The grasshopper, he didn't do anything. And it ends, when the winter comes, grasshopper freezes and dies. And of course, the ants, because like Solomon had said, he prepared his meat in the summer, He was okay, but that wasn't the way that the Muppet fairy tale went. Because at the end of the summer, the grasshopper, he drove south. And somebody accidentally stepped on the ant. And life is like that. No matter how well you plan. A lot of people had a lot of money invested in Enron. You remember Enron? Went belly up. Used to, people could count on working in one place oftentimes their whole life, but that's not true anymore. To make the bottom line look better, what do? They just lay you off. And don't call you back. That's a big fancy word for being fired. The way we used to say it at work, if you don't straighten up, you go home and stay there without pay. That means you're fired. And being a sheep is a lot like that. We don't always have control over what's going on in our lives. And God knows that. God understood that. That's why he knew that we needed a shepherd. But it's not been in control of our life and us needing a shepherd that I just want to talk to you a few minutes about this morning. Science calls sheep a prey species. You know what that means, don't you? Bottom of the food chain. And Jesus understood that too. He said, matter of fact, the work environment is not conducive to our health. He knew that. In Matthew, he told him, he says, I'm sending you forth as sheep among wolves. So we really only got one defense. Maybe two. First is the great shepherd. When Jesus was teaching about himself in the John, he said, the good shepherd, he says, he gives his life for his sheep. He said, the hireling will run away. In other words, when things get rough, he's gone. He's not going to, there's a difference. See, my dad's a preacher. And one time he traveled around when he was feeling better, he did tent revivals. And one time they was down near Litchfield, Kentucky. I don't know if you know where that's at, but he was down in that area and there was a tornado coming. tent emptied out fast. You know, Pentecostals, like most of us people, they like to talk. But when everybody heard that there was a tornado and everybody was gone. Now everybody except for Dad and his crew. Because why? Because the tent and what was in it, they had ownership of it. And that's the way Jesus Christ feels about us. The storm, everyone else might run off, but not him. He's going to stay there. Dad told me about they were trying to hold the ropes down to keep, to protect everything. Terrible storm. That's the difference in a good shepherd and ones that don't really care about you. And it's easier not to care about you. I'll be honest with you. If I always said what's going on in my son's life, the family that loves each other, they share the flu amongst each other. It makes more reason to me to shake our hands and be friendly. It's difficult to pass germs this way. We'll get us all little plastic bubbles. We'll walk around when we visit each other. But I've learned a few things about sheep that I didn't know as I did my study. And I tried the best I was able to verify most of what I'm going to tell you. Sheep, they run around. They have a real strong flocking instinct. Matter of fact, a large group of sheep, they also call it a mob, it's just quite good, I think. When I start thinking of you guys, I want to start thinking of you as a mob now instead of a flock. But really, that's because they're prey species. That's really, and that in their eyesight, But when they feel threatened, that's what they do. They bunch up. Dick, was you ever familiar with, did you have sheep? I knew you was. It's not real common in this part of the country, but I knew you was kind of a country boy. I thought maybe. And they'll bunch up for protection. Now that sounds all well and good, don't it? As far as it goes. But the reason they do that is basically the stronger sheep will force their way to the middle of the mob. In other words, the old saying is, if you and your buddy run into a bear, you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than your buddy. You've heard that one. And basically that's the sheep, the stronger sheep, the more fearful sheep will force their way in toward the center of the flock, leaving the weaker ones to fend for themselves, more to speak. They've studied sheep and they found out it takes 4 to make a flock, so we're good. That's one reason that they're saying that what I've read, I don't watch sheep trials, but they generally use 3 sheep when they're doing sheep trials because it's a challenge. See, they've scientifically tested sheep. They'll put sheep in a maze. 1 sheep, he does okay finding his way. 2 sheep are terrible at it. 3 sheep are terrible at it. But when they get 4, they start working together. And they do much better than just the 1. So they're saying 4 sheep make a flock. Sheep very sociable animals. They don't like to be separated. They said if they come across a new foodstuff, a farm page said this, that if they come across a new foodstuff, a couple of them would eat it and the rest of them won't. And if one of those sheep die that ate the unfamiliar food, the rest of them won't eat it. I wondered, little sheep votes. Did you think of sheep draw straw maybe? The sheep straws here. I didn't get the short one. I don't know. However they choose, I don't know. And they're also you've heard of terminology. When we call people sheep, we're talking about someone who just follows people. And sheep are very follower-oriented, though. That's why it works so well for shepherds. And their fear of dogs is why dogs are so good at herding sheep. People figured out a long time ago with a dog, which cause them to bunch, and then the shepherd to lead them. As a matter of fact, cattle, you have cattle drives, but the shepherd in the Bible, he would lead. And at night they would put them they would pin them up in a sheepfold. And the shepherd, remember Jesus said, I am the door. No man cometh to me by God by any other way. Because the shepherd would he would be the door. He would be there at the opening of that sheepfold. And though there may be 2, 3 different flocks that may, some guys might have got together as a community thing and built a big sheepfold so they could kind of hang out, because after all, you didn't get to carry a Walkman or a video games when you was a shepherd. Might explain why David was a very prolific musician and writer, and wrote many of the Psalms, we believe. Because out there in the desert, himself as company in the sheep, maybe a few other shepherds, they could at least have a jam session. But when they had time to take those sheep out to feed, each shepherd, when they'd give their own call, and they do those sheep, though they was all mingled together that night, they would separate, each following their own shepherd. My sheep, he said, know my voice, and another they'll not follow. And it was common for the shepherd, he'd count his sheep, he'd check them, make sure they're all right. I've been thinking about some folks, and they would kind of put a rod forth and they would count them. They'd know each of them by name. And Jesus said if one was missing among 100, he says what? He said that they went and hunted for that one. They would leave the 99 to go find that one. You can understand then why the Bible speaks of Jesus and God speaks of himself as a shepherd that watches over. Because, folks, we need taken care of, because we haven't got a whole lot of control over what goes on us. People, the Bible talks about, you've heard the saying, wolves in sheep clothing. Sometimes we thought we could trust somebody, and we found out we couldn't. But we know that we can trust the shepherd because he's already given his life to prove himself to us. 1 Peter 5, 8 through 9 goes like this: be sober. Be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for anyone he can devour. Resist him, firm in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are being experienced by your brothers in the world. We're being hunted. We are a prey species. And we are commanded to be harmless as doves. And so we've only got the great shepherd to rely on, and I think wisdom. The Bible says in the book of Proverbs, above all things, get wisdom. When human beings, and God willing, we're going to start a study on this pretty soon, but if human beings realized how flawed that we are, then we would understand why Peter would say, be on our guard. Because we're just prone to mistakes. We are prone to getting lost because while we're thinking about, we're kind of like the sheep. We're thinking about what we want. I was going to put a sheep's face up here going, food, and then water. And then some of them's going, woman. After a while, their mating season. Food, water. And as we go about our life looking for the things that we need, of course, we are emotional human beings. Our needs are a little bit more complicated than that. Oftentimes what we end up doing is finding ourselves in trouble because we're following our desires without understanding that our natural desire gets us in trouble. It's easier to do the wrong thing. That's the path of least resistance. Last week, it's sickness and different things, and we didn't have church. I was kind of relieved. Is that okay for a preacher to say that? Preaching's hard on me sometimes. I'm not that good at it all the time. And so I'm conflicted. It's like when the grandkids come over. Don't you love to see them, but aren't you so glad to see them go? I remember one time watching Zoe. That's why young people have kids. I forget, we had her for a while. My wife says, can you watch her for a while? I need to go lay down. I said, sure, honey, go take your nap. And as much as I love seeing you guys because I care about you, my natural inclination is not to want to come to church. I understand when people don't come to church. I really don't always want to come either. I've just learned through the years a little bit of discipline. My sheep nature is to seek comfort. But that gets you in trouble. And then when you get in trouble, oftentimes, it's like God is the last person you want to turn to. It's like getting a call from your kids. They try everything, but after a while, they know mom and dad would probably help them out. They'll call. I think there was a guy sheep are different, in every country. Some of them have more flocking tendencies than others, but mountain sheep tend to get themselves in trouble. And I think it was Moody he had talked to a man that had sheep in Scotland. He was Scottish. And he said, sheep, because they're chasing what they want, sometimes get themselves in a pickle. They would jump somewhere where there was good food, not realizing once they got there wasn't no getting out of it. And he said, when that would happen, then the shepherd would start his bleating. It's that pathetic sound I guess a shepherd hears. But the shepherd didn't go get them out immediately. And they would leave that sheep there. And leave that sheep there. And leave that sheep there till the sheep was almost too weak to stand. Then they would climb down and get it. And he asked, he says, why do you not get it immediately? He says, because when you do that, he says, you go down immediately. He said, they'll run from you. And if you're on the side of a cliff, where's there to go? And he said, people are just like that. Oftentimes, we don't let God help us until we've just tried everything else that we know of. I try to make myself happy. My wife shared with you that we knew the Lord when I was young. When I got older, I think I told you the other week, I decided I didn't really like God as my shepherd. That's, I guess, what I was saying. I didn't want him to be my boss, tell me where I could go in and where I could come out of. And I backslid, and I tried to make myself happy, and it wasn't working. It wasn't working. Because the shepherd knows better. He knows where the pasture is. He knows what the dangers are. Hebrews 5 goes like this. For every high priest taken from among men is appointed in service to God for the people, to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray, because he himself is also subject to weaknesses. Because of this, he must make a sin offering for himself as well as for the people. No one takes this honor on himself. Instead, a person is called by God, just as Aaron was. Even when God raises up people to praise team, teachers, preachers, we're just another sheep, okay? We're just another sheep who are supposed to understand what it is to be weak. I understand what it is to be weak. I think some of you probably do too. That's one thing that caused me to turn to Christ, is when I realized that there was just things beyond my power and control to take care of. For he is Lord of my life, shepherd of my soul. I never asked her to sing that, but it just kind of turned out that way. I've got sheep on the brain. It's to understand what it is to be weak. And I will encourage you to study the scriptures. I went to a guy, this guy's been like taking care of sheep for like 21 years. And I'm going to just quote, he knew he was a teacher by trade, but he raised sheep on the side. It was sort of his hobby too. And he gave like 10 tips. Now, I don't need to show you all of them, because he's talking about fattening them up, some of them, for market. And I'm not preparing any of you for market, so don't worry about that. But I thought some of this stuff he said was pretty cool. He said, make the sheep care for themselves. Sheep can provide their own housing, harvest their own feed, and spread their own manure. And when I saw that, spread their own manure, I've met some sheep that could spread manure pretty well. So I don't know what he had in mind, but I know what I think of. I've worked, one thing is, as God moves you from the outskirts of a body of believers, closer toward the middle of the flock, you start finding out all kinds of stuff. And you can imagine, where the sheep are crowded to what? There's just more manure. And I'm telling you, for those of you that desire to work for the Lord, hey, you're going to get some of it on your shoes, so to speak, every now and then. Because people can make a mess. But I really like this in the thinking that you need and I need to provide for ourselves. If I've told you this before, if the only preaching you're getting is from me, the only thing about the scripture you're finding out from me, that's as good as far as it goes, I hope. But you need to feed yourselves. And that takes discipline. You understand that. You've got grandkids. You've had kids. Did they like doing their homework? Think of studying the scripture as your homework. But I don't want to. I'm grown now. You can't make me. If you want to feed yourself and understand something about your own human nature and something about the nature of God, I have to encourage you, you need to study the scriptures. That's the number one prescription for keeping yourself healthy. A guy said, and I'm beginning to believe this, he says the number one thing that we could do for our physical health is what we eat. They're just beginning to find that out more and more. I even heard that there's something about beta carotene. Some of you probably take supplements with beta carotene. They're not even sure that the supplements do what they're meant to do. They know that beta carotene in a carrot works for something about being in that form helps. You have to go to the source. We're more and more learning. That's why we're starting to see more organic stuff offered in the store, more grass-fed beef instead of grain-fed beef. Because we realize we have to get closer to the source the way that we're designed. And I'm telling you folks that if you're going to take care of yourself, the only way that you can do it, and I will try to tell you the truth, but you need to study the scriptures on your own. And when that's hard, listen to someone else. Listen on the radio. If those of you that don't know and are interested, AM 900, for those of you who could pick it up, it's preaching sometimes almost all day. I think it's 94.7 FM. I'm trying to remember. I got it on my dial. Got a lot of preaching on it. Sometimes I listen to preaching on the way to work. Sometimes I listen to preaching on the way back. That's counting whatever studies I try to do to get ready for here. And then God quickens my heart sometimes to scriptures when I'm meditating on Him. So the sheep need to care for themselves. There's a sheep that they call a bellwether sheep. And it was the sort of the sheep that's the leader. They put a bell around his neck. Unlike me, they fixed that. It's a ram, but it's been fixed. I haven't been fixed. But I'm just a sheep with a bell on its neck, okay? Sometimes, I think I change forms. Sometimes I'm a shepherd. I'm watching over the sheep. I just found out this recently too. Did I know that? Did you know that sometimes they use a donkey to watch over sheep? If I had some donkey ears, I would have worn them this morning. Not all donkeys are good at it. That might be what you're thinking. Well, I know one donkey is not real good at it. But they find that they could put a donkey with the sheep, and it will run off, wolves and coyotes. Sometimes a llama. Llama layman, you can call me. Or dogs. You know about dogs. But part of the way they find that they protect sheep also is that you just simply, if the shepherd shows up often enough. I've been thinking about that lately too, something dogs can smell when a human's been around. And the devil should know that God's people are around God's people. Just like he's out looking for someone that's been separated from the flock. Now, we can be separated for a lot of reasons. We can be following our own food, water. Or sometimes things happen such as sickness or work schedules and stuff that keep people out of church. Still, let's do like cats. You ever notice a cat, if you walk in his room, it's rubbing. I used to think they was being so nice, they're just putting their sin on you. Well, let's do that with our brother and sister question. Let's make the devil, when he comes snooping around, he knows that there's other people watching over this person. A sick sheep is a dead sheep. He goes on and he says, you got to take big steps to keep sickness out of the flock. To me, what sickness is sin that's unaddressed. If you let sin go, it's like people are like kids in that respect. If you let one kid get by with it and around 10 kids, pretty soon all 10 of them will be doing it. We've tried to teach, you've noticed this, we've tried to teach the kids, the platform is not a place to be. But if I let one up there, you just watch. As soon as they're like, someone's on the platform. They can sense it. So sometimes I have to remind Zoe it's different when just Grandpa's here. Sometimes what's okay when just Grandpa's here is not so okay when all the rest of the kids are here. But it's dealing with sin. I've seen preachers let sin go on in the church that they knew about. And folks, I think that's one reason that the church is in the shape it's in now. I think part of a preacher's job is we don't just tell the good news, but we tell it like it is. And we got to call sin, sin. Because if you let sin go, then other people become emboldened, they sin. Oftentimes I wish that they'd put more police on 65 going into Louisville. They would probably pull me over occasionally. If you get in the left lane, if you don't drive fast, what happens? You get run over. And I don't like driving that fast. But someone found out they could, and another person can't stand for someone to pass them, so now they do. And I don't care if you're driving 80, there's always one person who can't stand for anybody to drive faster than they drive. You ever notice that? I'm really flying. I don't want to go. Wait a minute, maybe not. And if sin is let go in the body of Christ, it begins to multiply, makes the rest of us sick. It makes the rest of us sick. I like this one. This just makes me laugh. It's the sheep's fault. I think I'm going to put that somewhere. So whenever a problem occurs, always blame the sheep. That's one of my favorite sayings at the work, by the way. It's not what you know, it's who you know to blame. Being fast on that guy. Now, sometimes, hey, it's not the sheep's fault. But hey, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. Feed the ewes what they need, not what they want. This pressure is on a preacher, and this pressure is on a song leader. And I don't know if you feel this at work or not. But if you do, I'd be interested in hearing about it. Even Jesus in his earthly ministry felt this pressure. It's the pressure of giving people what they want. Some churches, this is the way they start their church. A church in the community. They go and they take a sort of census. We're taking the survey to find out what it is that you like. Reminds me of a story about a preacher who had just come into Kentucky to preach. He's a pastor, a young pastor of a church, and a lot of churches are run by the deacons. And the first Sunday, the preacher was preaching against cigarettes. Now, you probably never heard that, but I grew up in Pentecostal circles. Sometimes cigarettes was the main preaching subject. And afterwards, deacons took him and said, look here, buddy, a lot of these here tithe payers growing back. You leave them be. Oh, that's off his list. Next Sunday's bourbon. Well, you know what Kentucky is known for? Horses and bourbon. The deacons said that's not a good idea either. Old Billy Bob worked for Jack Daniel. So the next Sunday he preached about the sins of living in Kentucky, about living upon the ocean. Because he felt pretty safe on that one. There ain't no ocean around. Sins that you could get into on the ocean around Kentucky. That's what people want. The Bible, even the Old Testament, people wanted what the ministry could give. Oftentimes ministries, and I thank God that there are big churches, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they get so big that a lot of the people that they draw is because of what they have. They got a gym. They got swimming pools. I know of a church is putting cup holders in so you could bring your coffee. I believe in giving people what they need, not what they want. That means it's the same thing. You told your kids to eat your vegetables. Was your kids like my son? His plan was to outweight me. And he would shove his vegetables all around his plate so it looked like less than there was. You know, if I gave him a little pile of greens, they'd be moved to every side of his plate, spread all over thin. I got to admit, he wore me down sometimes. But you want your kids to eat their vegetables and drink their juices for what reason? Because you know it's good for them. My pressure when I come to church, oh God, let me be funny. Let me make them feel good. And sometimes what Jesus don't want me to make you feel good at all. Can you believe that? Because you know sometimes when I'm in the presence of Jesus, I don't feel good at all. Because sometimes a shepherd's got a staff. That sometimes a staff may be for, guiding her. It could also crack. And so what we do, if we try to give people just what they want, we remember Jesus, one day he set people down, had compassion on them, had them ate for days because of his preaching. Sat him down, found a young lad that had some few fish and a few pieces of bread, and he fed 5,000 people. Then he went off and to someplace else to preach, and then they followed him. And he turned around and looked at him and says, you didn't follow me because of what I said. You come for more bread and fishes. You think I'm a drive-through, a traveling drive-through, basically. He didn't feed them that time. And it's always pressure if you're ministering to, or if you're a mom and dad or a grandma. How hard is it, grandmas, to make your grandkids do what they ought to do sometimes? You want to be the fun one. Let mom be the mean one. Let daddy be the mean one. But if we're not careful, we end up raising a people up that's what they're seeking after. They have done studies, and narcissism is a big problem in the United States. And a narcissist, in case you don't know, is a person who thinks only they're self-centered, basically, about their outlook on life. And that's what we're rearing in this United States. This is getting to be a big part of our culture. And people are only interested in what they could get. They said this about the sheep, that he didn't always, sometimes he fed them grain, but he only fed them grain when they were nursing. Because grain is something sheep, they'd go crazy over if you let them, I suppose. And he mentioned it like this. He says, sheep that are grain predators, that's a pretty strong word. That's what they're after. Are loud and obnoxious and damage themselves, their lambs, and the soft-headed shepherd that gets in the way. Feed them what they need, not what they want. I was listening to a psychologist was teaching on raising kids, and people would bring problem kids to him. And they had this one kid, his mom, he won't eat nothing. He won't eat nothing. And he says, what do you mean what he won't eat? And he says, we're Italian. He won't eat pasta. And he'd raise a big fuss and cane and stuff. And he says, this is what I want you to do next time. Next time that they had spaghetti, she didn't set him a place at the table. And of course, when he come to the dinner table, there was no place for him there. And he said, what's going on? And she says, well, I know that you don't like spaghetti. And he walked over to the spaghetti and looked at it, and he says, I think I could eat this spaghetti. See, he was used to getting what he wanted his way. And folks, we're raising a generation. That's where it ends up becoming self-centered kids. It's a mistake for people to think they have to run their kids somewhere 4 and 5 days a week. They're going to grow up and they're going to want to marry a man that's going to want to give them what they want 4 or 5 days a week. And us men aren't very good at that, are we? We might try to keep up for a while, but we fall behind after a while. Give them what they need, not what they want. Because when we become obsessed with what we want, we damage the little ones, we damage those that are around us, and we damage those that are trying to help us. There's another kind of sheep, and I want to quit here in a second. Because sheep have a very strong herding instinct, especially English sheep from what I read. They had different names. One was the the bellwether. I told you that other sheep would follow. It's just, by the way, the following instinct is strong. And so sometimes they'll train a sheep at a slaughter yard to lead the other sheep where they want it to go. I think they also use goats. You've probably heard of the Judas goat. Just all its training, all it's meant to do is take the other sheep, get it going through the chute that they want to go to slaughter. But there's another sheep that tends to feed further out than the rest of the sheep. It's called an outlier. Originally, it was a term that was applied to people that worked kind of far away from the home. It was an English term for people who worked a long way from where they lived. There was two basic reasons that the sheep tend to feed that far out. One, they figured it was because they just wasn't very afraid of stuff. So they was a little bit more venturesome. And the other reason, sometimes because when they was in the middle of the group, they weren't getting enough food. Maybe the other sheep, because maybe this one was weak or something, wouldn't let it feed properly. So it would have to forage out a little bit further to get enough food. Those are the kind of the sheep that I worry about in the church, the outliers. You guys, you show up. You show up unless I call and tell you, you're sick. Or I say, stay home. But for those who don't ever get into the middle of our mob, they're in greater danger. They're further out. It's the stray that Satan tends to pick up. The ones that don't quite put roots down in the church. They kind of belong to you, but they kind of don't. You don't rightly know when you can expect them, when you don't expect them. I worry about those folks. Now, it could be there's reason either they haven't learned what danger, and like I said, God willing, we're going to study maybe for too long, open to change, on human nature, so we understand ourselves a little better. So they don't understand what danger that they're in. But the other reason is because they're not getting enough feed here close. You ever seen the cartoon, The Little Pig? With all the mamas on her side, and there's always this one little pig that can't find nowhere place to get in to feed. Sometimes, some folks come to church and feel like that. They don't ever feel plugged in. I would step that back up. A preacher can do what a preacher can do. But if we was to grow much, I found when me and my wife used to have youth camp here sometime, you get around 13 kids, I felt spread pretty thin as far as giving each of them individual attention. I understood completely why Jesus chose 12 disciples, not 24 or 30. So he can invest himself fully in them. And even at that, it was a chore. So if I do what I'm supposed to do, and if I'm not, kind of tap me on the shoulder because I'm a sheep. And sometimes my sheep brain is working instead of the one that God's trying to give me. But also I need for you to help them plug in. Rub your sin on them. Okay, I know whose that smell is. I know whose perfume that is. I know whose aftershave that is.